Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today I'm going to talk about my BookTube judging experience in the semifinals, how I ranked these books, and by the time this airs, the results will have been announced and we will know which books have made it to the finals. So for the semifinals, there were, in the fiction division, which is what I was judging, there was two groups of six, and A and B. I'm in group B. And so I'm going to talk about the 6 books that I read in order from how I ranked them from number 6 up to number 1. Now, the last time I did this, I made a vlog and I taped a little review of each book as I went and I put it together. And what I liked about that was capturing my thoughts right after I read the book instead of trying to remember and sum it up. But it was really long because each one just felt like a short book review. But then when I put them all together, it was really long because I talked maybe for 5 or 6 minutes, maybe up to 8 minutes about each book, which seems short separately, but then all together, it was really hard to edit and not have an enormously long video. So I didn't do that this time. Also, a couple of the books were repeats from earlier segments of the judging, and so this time I'm going to try to just talk briefly about each book, give you a little sense of what that book was like and why I placed it where I did. I must say, and I've said this before, when you get to the later rounds of this judging competition, it gets pretty tough because the books they're all good in different ways. Or you can imagine why some people would really love this book and that other book. So however I put these together in my rankings, somebody else has done something entirely different. And in fact, Robert Sheard, who puts together this whole event, and thank you, Robert, because it's an enormous amount of work to moderate and organize this judging event amongst hundreds of judges. He has said that everything, almost when you get down to the end, everything has been ranked in first place. And then it's just a compilation of all of the votes. So everything's been number 1 and everything's been number 6. So that's my disclaimer. So if you wildly disagree with my rankings, that's part of the fun. So please let me know your thoughts courteously and we can discuss our differences of opinion. So without any further preamble, let's go into the 6 books. A little more preamble, I lied. So one thing I thought about in those cases where I was having difficulty figuring out a specific placements, like should something be 5 or 6? Should something be 2 or 3 or 3 or 4 or whatever it is? I had to think about, well, wait a minute, what is my job here? Am I trying to judge? Am I saying what I enjoyed the most? What was my most pleasurable reading experience? Or do I look at the value of the book? Do I think it's a book that should go forward in a competition? Because the book that I had the most fun reading is not necessarily the same as the one that I think should win a prize, if that makes any sense. And then I thought about, well, did I immediately want to read other books by this author? Would I read other books by this author? Would I want to reread this book? Do I want to own a copy of this book? So different factors like that to help me decide where to rank the different books. So now I'm done with my preambles and let's roll the rankings. Number 6, in number 6 spot, I put The Reformatory by Tananarive. I know this could be controversial because I know a lot of people really, really love this book. It has a very high ranking on Goodreads and Storygraph. And like I said, I don't think any of the books in this batch are bad books, but I had to rank them somehow or another. And let me explain a little bit about what this book's about and why I put it at number 6. This is a book that takes place in Florida in, I think it's 1960. I've returned it to the library, but I'm pretty sure that was about the time frame. And it is about a young black boy who, well, he doesn't really do anything wrong, but he gets sent to this reformatory school, and it is based on the Dozier School, which is the same school in American history that Colson Whitehead's novel, The Nickel Boys, was based on. It was an infamous reform school for boys. Black and white boys were sent there for decades, and later on, after it was closed and they exhumed the grounds or whatever, they were renovating or building something new, they found unmarked graves. You know, a very dark history of brutality, primarily towards the black students, emerged. And So from that very dark story, some fiction is now coming out. So I did read The Nickel Boys. I believe that won a Pulitzer Prize. I'll put the year up on here, and I'll get back to that in just a minute. But in this particular examination of this source material, Tananarive combines historical fiction with horror. And I thought that sounded really intriguing. But ultimately, it didn't really gel and work for me very well. It's a very long book, and she basically divides the narrative into two sections. We have this young boy who is sent to the school as a young 12-year-old after he kicks an older white boy, influential family in town who was coming on to his sister. So he's protecting his sister, but to complicate matters, not only are they a black family in town, but their father is wanted for a trumped up crime that he didn't commit because he's a union organizer. So the influential and wealthy white families in town are kind of gunning for their dad, and they're trying to keep a low profile. And then this event happens, and the child gets sent to the school. And it's kind of thought in the family, maybe they're trying to flush out the dad, that he'll reappear because this happened. And his older sister, so one storyline is his older sister trying to help, trying to examine legal avenues. And then on the other side, we have the child at the school and the atrocities that he is witnessing. And then there's ghosts. There's angry, vengeful ghosts of lots of children who have been murdered at the school, and a whole plot line about a employee there who tries to capture them. So I know this all sounds very exciting, but unfortunately the book really could have benefited from some editing, because it's extremely long and it just bogged down. Like once it got going, it just kind of kept going, and I got lost about halfway through, started hoping that we were going to get somewhere. I thought the merging of the two genres did not work very well for me. And it was kind of jarring the way it jumped between the very realistic section about his sister and her quest to get him assistance, and the injection of some real life civil rights and legal figures, and then the straight up horror story that was going on at the Reformatory. It just didn't blend well for me, and I thought that it was an editing problem primarily, and so I got impatient partway through and kind of wanted it to get to the end, and I don't think that was the mood that the author was going for. So I thought it was an interesting approach. The idea of injecting supernatural elements or magical realism elements in a historical fiction is sometimes done very successfully. It didn't work too well for me in this particular novel. And I personally was haunted by the fact that I think The Nickel Boys is an absolutely stellar, almost perfect novel covering some of the same topic. Now, there's no rule that lots of people can't write a book about the same general source material. That happens all the time, and I will read multiple books about the same topic or source material. But if one of them is a particular favorite book, it is going to influence the lens that I see other books through. So that was a personal factor for me. I would read something else by this author. I think I'd look for some short fiction, which I have heard she has written, and some short horror fiction. I would be up for that. Number 5 for me was also a blending of historical fiction and horror, and it was Lone Women by Victor LaValle. This is a book that I read outside of the BookTube Prize judging. I read this last year sometime just for fun, and I really enjoyed it. This is a book that I did, when I got to the end, thought I want to read some more books by this author. This was really fun. The reason why it's number 5 and not higher up is because based on the other books in the batch, I didn't think it was the strongest in comparison to those as far as something advancing and winning a major prize. But it was really an enjoyable book. In this particular case, we have a young woman, and it is the mid-19th century in the United States, and a young black woman takes advantage of a loophole in a certain law that will allow women homesteaders and black homesteaders to claim property. It was probably an accidental loophole based on the prejudices of the time, but she takes advantage. And so the historical fiction aspect is about independent homesteaders, some being women out in the wilderness, taming the land and claiming something for themselves. And that was really enjoyable. The horror aspect is when she is leaving her hometown to go claim her homestead, she is leaving with an ominous trunk in the carriage and her home in flames behind her. Why is this happening? What's in the trunk? You have to read on to find out. And the suspense about what's in that trunk is really effective in this book. So the horror and the history kind of worked for me in this book. And the cast of characters also were interesting to me. The other women that she encounters on the prairie, and how there are people of color and queer people trying to make their way in this restrictive time period. And then the evils and the horrors in the book are both supernatural and very human as well, and the things that she has to combat. There were some loose threads, there were some things at the end of this book that weren't really resolved, that were certain characters were introduced and left hanging. So it wasn't a perfect book, but it was really a fun book. And I did leave wanting to read something else by Victor LaValle. Number 4 was a surprise to me. So number 4 is The House of Doors by Tan Tuan Eng. And when I heard that this was in my group, I was really excited because it was a book that I meant to read last year when it was on the Booker long list, and I just didn't get to it. And so I was sort of excited that I had a second chance and a reason to read it. And when I went into it, reading it, I thought this could blow everything up. Maybe this is going to be way up at the top because I've always wanted to read something by this author, and I've heard about his writing, and I've heard this book was really great. And that's not really what happened. This is a book that has many elements in it that sound like they would work just fantastically and really appeal to a reader like me. We have a famous author fictionalized, Somerset Maugham, or Willie as he's called in this book. His first name was actually William. And Willie and his secretary, Gerald, who is actually his lover, have gone to visit some friends that live in Malaysia, Leslie and Robert. Robert and Willie were friends and roommates years before. Willie and Gerald traveled the world looking for ideas for Willie's fiction and trying to avoid going home to London where Willie's wife lives. And there in Malaysia, he receives some really bad financial news that makes it even more urgent that he gets busy on a new novel really fast. And thinking for ideas, he starts to get a sense that Leslie, his host, who might have an interesting story in her past. And he starts to talk to her and wait for her to warm up and start to tell him this story about her association with the Chinese political figure. I don't have the book anymore. I'm going to put his name up on the screen. He thinks maybe she had an affair with him or something, the way she talks about him. So he kind of waits and patiently talks to her, and then a story within a story unfolds. And it's not the one he expected, but it's a pretty good one. So in this book, there are so many elements that I really enjoyed. I like stories within stories. There were stories about crimes and lovers and secret affairs, a court case, and lots of exciting elements, but the way that it is written is not very exciting. Tan Tuan Eng has a beautiful, descriptive, flowy style. It kind of fits the languor of this kind of jungle setting, but it just gets kind of boring after a while, I've got to admit. He took a lot of really juicy stuff that is going on in this story, and somehow it's not very juicy. And I kept sniffing out side stories that sounded a lot more interesting, like Gerald, who's 20 years younger than Willie and is kind of wild. I wanted to know more about his adventures. They met as ambulance drivers in World War I when Willie was already with his wife who has a child. She is only referred to as sort of a nagging, unstable, shrill kind of money demanding person. But I looked her up separately and she actually sounds very fascinating. She was a successful interior designer. I wanted to know more about her. But it was just written so stuffily. It was just kind of stuffy. And there was one part that stuck in my mind that I just had to set the book down and laugh for a while, because Leslie, okay, here's one of the problems, is that most of the story is about Leslie and everything through her point of view, and she's very upright and homophobic and stuffy herself, and eventually we get to her more juicy material. But Leslie's telling a story about when she was having tea with a friend, and they sit there and they discuss in their conversation that the tea tastes of loss and melancholy. Now, I drink a lot of tea. I drink gallons of tea. All I drink is tea and water. And I drink a lot of flavors of tea. And I've drank tea when I was feeling melancholy and loss, but the tea sure didn't taste like loss and melancholy. It was just overly flowery. And so a story that should have really just hit home and just consumed me just seemed kind of a little too prim and proper. So that's why House of Doors is at number 4. It's a good book. It has lovely writing, but it's just a little too lovely for me. Number 3 was another surprise. Number 3 was a book that I was fully prepared to not like at all. This was the one out of the set. There's always a book where I think, oh man, I don't really want to read that. And then I said, well, you know what? At least you got to give it a chance, because the requirement is if you don't like the book, you still have to hate read through it. So I started the book. I thought it was going to be whiny and navel-gazy and tedious, and I got something else. And that book was Wellness by Nathan Hill. And when you hear all the things that the book is about, it does sound like it might be too self-conscious and whiny. And maybe the length could have been less and could have reduced that kind of a possible effect. But I was really engaged in this book. The reason why it's number 3 and not higher is because it's a very of-the-moment book. I don't know how well its staying power will last except as a kind of a document of our times, but it was a really satisfying read for right now. Wellness is about a couple that meets in Chicago in 1990-ish, Jack and Elizabeth, and they meet as college freshmen. They have a very cute meet cute story, but later as the book unfolds, you find out that there's more to that meeting than meets the eye, but it takes a while till we find that out. So they meet and they're very idealistic about love and romance, and they both have left family backgrounds where they want to go entirely different direction and break with all those confines and narrow-minded views. Elizabeth's from this very wealthy and conservative family that's obsessed with success and money. And Jack is from a very poor farm family that doesn't trust education in cities and things like that. So they both come from these different backgrounds and find one another. And then we jump forward about 20 years when they are getting ready to buy a condo, and they have a young son, and they are kind of embroiled in the 21st century, all the pressures and anxieties. And there are so many plot lines and threads and topics in this book that I started making a list. Here's some of the things that the book is about. Okay, of course, the wellness industry and Elizabeth's job, it's an interesting thing. All right, so we have manifesting success, fitness trackers, parenting as a verb, open shelves in kitchens, too much internet information, adjunct teaching, invasive apps, mission statements at work that you have to retool every year, even though they have no meaning. All day human resource trainings that get repeated every single year that also have no meaning. So much about algorithms, entire chapters too much about algorithms, placebo effects, detox regimens, toxic positivity, angry old men on Facebook, gratitude exercises, groups that turn out to be cults, family traumas, the dawn of the internet versus what it has become, porn addictions, polyamory, gentrification, stale marriages, the male gaze, and tattoo regrets. That's just some of the things that come up that are, I guess, all part of the 21st century malaise that these characters deal with. And I don't want to say any more about the plot, but we start to go back in the past, and the lens keeps shifting what we think these characters are about, and then we get more understanding based on the past. And I kept thinking of the Philip Larkin poem, This Be the Verse, because these characters are haunted big time by the baggage of their pasts. And I will put that poem down below in case you're not familiar with it. But I just really enjoyed it. I did think it was too long. I did think it spent, I thought it was the parts about the Facebook algorithms. It is a plot point about what happens to his older isolated father, but it went on and on and on and on, and I didn't want to read all of it. So there was kind of too much of a good thing, but I surprised myself by how much I liked it. So wellness comes in at number 3. Now, number 1 and number 2 were not especially surprising because they were number 1 and number 2 on my last set of rankings. And I was perfectly willing to change their spot based on my experience reading these other books, but it didn't work out that way. They kept their exact same spots. Number 2 is Interos by Isabella Hamad, the story of a Palestinian British woman who goes home and to visit her sister after a terrible breakup. She's an actor in London. Her sister teaches in Tel Aviv, and she gets gradually sucked into a production of Hamlet in Arabic that is being put on in the West Bank. It's about family. It's about that. It's very specific and topical to the time and place and the tensions in this region. And so it's a story that really works on multiple levels, and I thought it was very excellently constructed. I love the parts where it slips into a play format. I just thought it was a good novel on several levels, and I learned more to consider the daily tensions of the life and our main character, Sonia, trying to navigate, she comes in feeling like a tourist, like a British tourist, not like somebody returning home, and gradually just becomes more and more connected to her heritage and her past and the current political situation. And this was written before the most recent turmoil in the region, but I found it really fascinating, and I thought it was really good. She has written one previous novel that I'm interested in looking at and then seeing what she does next. And then finally at number 1 is still my girl Ann Patchett with Tom Lake, and I love this book. I want to read it again. I want to read a bunch of other books of hers again. You know I love Tom Lake, and it was in my top 10 last year, so it would be really hard for anything to blast it out of its spot, and nothing did, even though I had some good reads along the way. Tom Lake is a story that takes place during the spring and summer of 2020 about a family that owns a cherry orchard, a middle-aged woman, and her 3 grown daughters in their 20s. And the 3 daughters come home to help harvest the cherries because their usual seasonal workers can't come that year due to COVID. And the girls, their various university events and things like that have been shut down or put online. So they all come home, and while they are working in the cherry orchard, they ask their mother to tell them the story about when she was their age and she briefly dated an actor who went on to become very famous. And she dated him when they were performing in a summer production of Our Town. And so that's what the basic plot is about. But this is a multi-layered, nuanced, subtle book about so many things. The story itself, the plot is absolutely, you just can't stop reading it. You get as caught up as these young women and wanting to know what happened back in that earlier time period in the 80s. It's about choices. It's about what you decide to do, what brings contentment. It's about, the daughters have different questions and approaches at where they are in their lives and wondering why their mother made the choices she did. She tells a story that they get most of, but we get all of. There's things that she leaves out that make the picture even richer and more complete. And it's a quiet story, but it's really beautifully constructed. A story that doesn't really do a ton as far as the action, but that just has so much emotional depth. And every time I think about it, I want to read it again, and I will read it again soon. So I still picked Tom Lake as my number one choice, and I really hope that it is in the finals. All right, so there it is. Like it or not, those are my rankings. Let me know what you think, how you feel about any of these particular books, or how you would rank them differently. And then by the time this airs, we will see what actually made it through to the finals from my group and the other group. So we shall see. Have a great day. Bye-bye.